I love you guys. We've been talking about patience. I was going to give them a chance, especially Carolyn, a chance to use it here in just a minute. Anyway, patience, we found out that it comes from a word that means suffering or to suffer. And so we know that when we're being patient, there's an element of suffering that takes place in that. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, that we have to be patient during the hard places, during the hard times. And then also we had to be patient. We talked about last week how we have to be patient, waiting on the reality of what God has spoken into our life to come to pass. That's a really difficult thing. Like, when is it going to happen? And we had to do that. Well, today, we're going to talk about being patient with each other. Yeah, I knew that would excite you. So, we're going to talk about being patient with each other. And, I'm just telling you, the person next to you, they're glad finally you get, because they've needed you to be patient with them for a while. And so, let's get started. Open up your Bibles, if you would, to 2 Timothy. Now, again, if you're learning your way around the Bible, there's an Old Testament and a New Testament. 2 Timothy's in the New Testament. And so it starts with Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy. Timothy was a young man that had become a Christian, and the Apostle Paul, a guy that had written a huge part of the New Testament, began to mentor him, began to prepare him for pastoring. And we believe that he pastored in Ephesus, and we'll read a letter from towards Ephesus here in a little bit. And so he was a pastor there. It became one of the first mega churches. Thousands of people went there. We even think that maybe Jesus' mother went there for a period of time, and that the last living apostle, John, went there as he finished up his life, and that Timothy was at some point martyred. But Paul is mentoring him, so he writes this letter to him, giving him instructions as far as what he's supposed to do as a minister. So 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 23 says, "Again, I say, don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights." Now, that's not the subject of my message, but some of you need to hear that, so I'm going to read that again. Don't get involved in don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights. Don't get involved in them. And don't push me to get involved in them either. I'm not going to, all right? So just need to know that. A servant of the Lord. Who? A servant of the Lord. So this is what servant of the Lords do. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone. So if you're a servant of the Lord, how many of you would say, "Yeah, man, I'm a servant of the Lord today"? Let me see your hands. So this is instructions for us, all right, as servants of the Lord. Some of you didn't raise your hand because you're like, "I don't know what you're getting ready to ask me." So a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone, be able to teach, and be patient. Now, if he stopped right here, this would be challenge enough, right? To say you got to be patient. But he's going to tell us who we have to be patient with. Are you ready? You're not going to like this. This is who we have to be patient with, and be patient with difficult people. Oh. Because I can be patient with people that aren't difficult. It's the difficult ones that I have a hard time being patient with. How many of you have a hard time being patient with difficult people? Man, I'm telling you. But he wants me to be patient with them, not irritated with them, not punch them in the head with them. Be patient with difficult people. Be patient with difficult people. Gently instruct those who oppose the truth. Perhaps God will change those people's hearts. Perhaps God will change those people's hearts. Gently instruct those who oppose the truth. Gently instruct those who oppose the truth. Perhaps God, not me, perhaps not you, perhaps God will change those people's hearts, and they will learn the truth. Then they will come to their senses and escape from the devil's trap, for they have been held captive by him to do whatever he wants. Now, just kind of a side thought for me, that for me personally, the Lord has given me this passage as kind of an outline of the ministry that he's called me to. That this is how I'm to minister. Anytime I get outside of this, I get convicted. I don't do it well. It's outside of my wheelhouse. But this is who I'm called to be as a pastor. This is what he's instructed me. That now, would this be, obviously this applies to everybody, but maybe in your ministry, he's given you some other passages that kind of line up and direct your calling specifically. This is for me. But then also for all of us as servants of the Lord, these are instructions that he gives us. That we're to be kind to everyone. Just not just the people that agree with us, not just the people that think like us, not just the people that look like us, not just the people that vote like us. We're supposed to be kind to everyone. Kind to everyone. And not get caught up in foolish, ignorant arguments. So many times in the church, we sacrifice our opportunity to tell people about the love of God and who Jesus wants to be in their lives for the sake of other issues that aren't nearly as important as their spiritual well-being. I knew that excites you. We're called to share the good news. We're called to share the good news. You know what the good news is? That all of us have sinned and deserve judgment. That's the good news. I'm not finished. But even though we deserve judgment, Jesus was judged for us. And when we make Jesus Lord of our life, if we make Jesus Lord of our life, we escape judgment. That's good news. It's good news, right? So we're called to share the good news. And so if we make Him Lord of our life, not everybody does, but if we do, we escape judgment. So it goes on to say, perhaps God will change those people's hearts. But it says, be patient with difficult people. Difficult people. So right here he's saying that as a servant of the Lord, these are things that a servant of the Lord should do. So part of our testimony is how we respond to difficult people. How many of you have a difficult person in your life? All right? How many of you are thinking about that difficult person right now? I'm not going to ask how many of you rode to church with that difficult person, but now here's one question we may not want to answer. How many of you are a difficult person to somebody else? I'm going to raise my hand because I know for some people I'm like really difficult, to be around. But what's our response? How are we supposed to respond to them? Well, as Christians, one of the things that says that we truly follow Jesus is that when it comes to difficult people, we're patient. And again, patience involves suffering, that we're willing to suffer on their account because of them. It is a testimony. People that will not hear a word that we say, that the way that we respond to difficult people can speak loudly to them. It's part of who we're called to be. It's our testimony as Christians to be patient with difficult people. And again, I know, the truth of the matter is that all of us at different times in our life, we encounter difficult people. And, I'm sure, my issues are well documented, the things that I struggle with, the way people drive. I mean, I'm driving today and I'm thinking, it would be nice if they said, hey, we've got this lane for the people that drive fast and this lane for the people that drive slow. It would be nice if they did that, but apparently they don't do that around here. So here's the thing, is that frustrates me, and I can be kind to them, but let's be real honest. I mean, that 2 or 3 minutes of frustration is different than the fact that if there's a difficult person that you encounter on a daily basis. Those are the ones that really grow us, right? They either grow us or they expose us. And as a servant of the Lord, we're called to be patient with difficult people. So I want to speak specifically to those of you, right? I mean, this goes to all of us, but for some of you right now, you're in a season of life where on a regular basis, there's this individual that you encounter that they just really frustrate you. Maybe they're not trustworthy. Maybe they're not honest. Maybe they're not, they're just annoying the way they respond, or they have all sorts of issues in their life, and some of them are off-putting, and some of them are offensive. And it's just like we think of all these things like, if I were to say, well, what's your response to difficult people? Well, typically I'll just punch them. I mean, that's not what you're supposed to do. That we're called with difficult people to be patient with them. A servant of the Lord must be patient with difficult people. And so this speaks loudly to people that Jesus is really who we say He is. Not just in general, but to us. So number one is that patience is part of our testimony. It's a part of our testimony. It's part of who God has called us to be, what He's called us to do. Let's look at Ephesians 4. That's a few books back. It's in front of 2 Timothy by a few books. Ephesians chapter 4. And this again was another letter that this guy named Paul wrote to this church in Ephesus that he started. So he's giving them instructions. The first 3 chapters of this letter really kind of talk about what Jesus has done for us spiritually, that in Him we've been redeemed. We've been given all spiritual blessings. I mean, all sorts of things like that. And then 4 through 6 talks about what that looks like in our lives. That because of that, because of Him living on the inside of us, that we should avoid sexual sin, that we should not steal, but give to those that have need. And the way we talk with each other should be different. So he starts out with chapter 4, verse 1. He says this, therefore, in other words, because of all these things I've shared, I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling. So what is a life worthy of our calling? Our calling as Christians. That when we respond to Jesus, we make Jesus Lord of our life, then at that moment we've received the calling to live a Christ life. And so what does that life look like? For you have been called by God. So he said this is what it looks like. Always be humble. Now humility is not first my response. I mean, the way I am in front of you. Humility is first the way I am in front of God. Now, it will show out in the way that I deal with you. Because if I'm humble towards Him, then He'll convict me in how I treat you. Because He loves you. And so there are certain things He won't let me get away with if I'm operating in humility towards Him. That always having to be right won't be the thing. He'll want us to make sure that we're right. So to walk worthy of the calling, I have to be humble. And not only do I have to be humble, but he says this, therefore I beg you to live a life worthy of your calling. If you have been called by God, always be humble and gentle. And then he said this, be patient with each other. So first of all, he told Timothy, be patient with difficult people. And then he said with each other, that in the body of Christ, be patient with each other. Now, I think this is interesting. Now, he's writing this letter to Christians. So he's saying that sometimes in the church, you're going to encounter people that you have to be patient with. Have any of you discovered that sometimes in church, there are people you have to be patient with? Is there anybody? Have any of you discovered that sometimes there are pastors in churches you have to be patient with? Anybody discovered? We're not talking about me. So we have that, right? That we have to be patient with certain people. And he said, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. In other words, I'm going to be patient with you, making allowance, knowing that there's still a work going on in you. There's still this thing that's taken place in you, that these things that you haven't overcome yet, that I'm going to make allowance for those things. Why? Because of my love for you. He goes on to say, because of your love. And he went on to say, make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. So, he said that one of the reasons why we're patient with each other and make allowances for it, oh, you know what they did? I know, man, they're still growing. I get so tired. I know they're growing. I'm going to be patient with you because I love you. And hopefully, when you run into those things with me, you'll be like, dude, you wear me smooth out, but I know you have a lot of areas to grow in, so because I love you, I'm just going to be patient with you. I need it. So being patient with each other because of our love. So number 2 is this, is that patience is the way we demonstrate our love for others. Now, one chapter that people love dearly is 1 Corinthians 13. It's called the love chapter. It's the one where, love is patient, all that kind of stuff. And if you look in the very first 3 verses of 1 Corinthians 13, Paul is talking to them. He says, look, if I don't have love, he said, I may know everything, but if I don't have love, I'm nothing. I may give away everything, but if I don't have love, I've done nothing. I may be able to speak the language of men and of angels, but without love, it's just a clanging, cymbal and all that kind of stuff. And so that it means nothing. And then starting in verse 4, he begins to describe what this love is like. And he starts out with these 2 words, love is. And the very first word he uses to give us an idea of what love is what? Love is patient. One of the very first characteristics that shows up with the love of God, a love that's like any other love, is that it's a patient love. And again, when you think about love, it's the love that God demonstrates towards us that He wants us to demonstrate towards each other. So the very first thing that God is with me is patient. He's patient with me. And so He's like, I've put my love in your heart, Rick, so just like I'm patient with you, I want you to be patient with others. Now, there's different like English versions of the Bible. They mean the same thing, but it's kind of been translated into kind of a more contemporary language. We call it the New Living Translation, is the one we use. But one that's kind of like the most accepted around the world is the King James Version. And in place of the word love here in 1 Corinthians 13, it uses the word charity. Because this love is a love that kind of like it gives itself. It's an emptying. It's just without expecting anything in return. It's giving sometimes to somebody that doesn't measure up, that couldn't afford it. It's just given. And so it says this. It doesn't say charity is patient. You know what it says? Charity suffers long. Charity suffers long, noting that when we love somebody, to give them room to grow, to make allowances, that sometimes it's incredibly uncomfortable. It's incredibly uncomfortable to be patient while people are growing. But it's the first characteristic that's used to describe what makes this love different. Because I can say I love people and be impatient. But God's love says, if I love you, I am patient. And then it doesn't stop there. It'd be one thing if it says be patient. What else it tells me to do? It says it's patient and kind. Really? So not only can I not hit you in the head, now I got to be kind while not hitting you in the head? I thought it was like, hey, you know what, dude? I just got saved, and used to me and you'd be fighting, but we're not going to fight. So just leave me alone because we're not going to fight. But now it's saying, not only do I have to say we're not going to fight, but it's like, can I do anything for you? Man, Rick, this is hard. Yeah, tell me about it. But it's who we're called to be, and God wants to help us live this way out. And I have to constantly be reminded, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, how patient He is with me in so many areas of my life. So when we love people, if we truly love them, and we're called to be kind to everyone, we're called that our circle of love should be that people should be allowed in it, that in the middle of us loving them, to be patient with them. People that challenge you, if people saw how you reacted and respond to them, what word would they use to describe how you treat them? Well, that so-and-so's just indifferent to them. So-and-so's they're just not very kind to them. So-and-so just gives them the silent treatment. What if they said, you know what, I know this person gets on their nerves, and they're just consistently patient with them. And not only are they patient with them, but they're kind while they're doing it. That's really challenging, isn't it? You know what gets me is that we can sit in a service like this and somebody can say, well, I just want the deeper things of God. Well, a lot of times what they mean by that is confusing. But here's the thing, is that we make statements like that, and yet we're still struggling in these so-called simple things. Is there anybody really in here that has this down? That you're kind and patient with every difficult human being you come across? Please don't raise your hand. Because then I got to preach on lying and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah. What do you say we get this? This is our label. That when we're doing this like we're supposed to, man, it really does say something about who we are. That I really cannot do this if I refuse to lay my life down. That in order for me to be patient with difficult people, for me to be patient with people and make allowances, I literally have to lay myself down at the will of God, that it has to be part of this cross that I carry that's incredibly uncomfortable for me. Because instinctively, I don't want to be patient with people that irritate me. And I especially don't want to be kind while I'm doing it. And yet the love of God requires it of me. That one of the first examples, one of the first things that happens in my life when I've yielded myself to God's love in the way that I respond to Him and then the way I respond to humanity is one of the very first things that shows up is that I'm patient with people in their broken places. And for me, I have to daily pick this cross up. I wish I could say there was one prayer. You pray this prayer, and then from there on out, you never struggle with it anymore. But for me, all I can tell you is my experience is that my experience has to be a regular thing. And especially, when I think I'm finally on the other side of that last difficult person that at first I'm like, will we ever get rid of them? Then finally, when it's like, it's not about getting rid of them, but it's about laying my life down and being kind to them and loving them at the same time. When I finally get victory over that, and I'm like, I think I'm there. Then their cousin shows up. And they're better at being difficult than their cousin was. And I didn't think that was possible. And once again, I have to lay my life down. Make allowances because that's what the love of God does. It doesn't validate behavior. It doesn't say that what you're doing is okay. It loves you in the middle of your brokenness. Sometimes love is corrective. Sometimes it's confrontational. It's always kind. Number 2, patience is a way we demonstrate our love for others. Let's look at number 3 and we'll close with this. Go with me if you would to Matthew 18. Matthew 18. Matthew is the first book in the New Testament. It was written by a guy named Matthew, of all things. Can you imagine that? He was a follower of Jesus, that he was a tax collector that had gotten saved, and then he writes this eyewitness account to what took place with Jesus. And so there's this moment where Peter begins this conversation, and a lot of you have probably heard it, but I think we could almost put ourselves in there. It says this: Then Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? How many times do I have to keep forgiving them? 7 times? That seems like a lot, right? I forgave them the first time they did it. I even forgave them the second time they did it. And the third time it was difficult and I forgave them. The Lord 7 times? And Jesus said no. And I'm sure in that moment when He said no, there's this brief sigh of relief like, whew. But then Jesus kept talking. No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. So Jesus begins to share this parable, and He's talking about this king that's bringing up his accounts to people that were subject to him. Now, in this story, who do you believe the king is? It's God, right? And so this guy comes, and he owes the king a lot of money. He's in huge debt to him. But again, Jesus is sharing the story, and He wants them to get the idea the king is really God, and the servant is really not somebody that owes money, but somebody that's committed sin. So I want to change the characters for just a minute, and I don't think it'll be a violation of the intent here. I'm going to say that the king, instead of where it says the king, I'm going to say God. And when it says servant, I'm going to say me. Okay? So are you ready? Let's follow this right here, okay? So it says, and Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times. No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to God who decided to bring His accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, I was one of the debtors, and I was brought in, and I owed him millions, and I couldn't pay. But he ordered that I had to be sold, along with my wife and my kids and everything I owned, to pay the debt. But I fell down before him and begged him, please be patient with me. I will pay it all. Then God was filled with pity for me, and He released me and forgave me my debt. But when I left His presence, I went to a fellow servant who owed me a few $1,000s. And I grabbed him by the throat and I demanded instant payment. My fellow servant fell down before me and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me, he said to me, and I will pay it, he pleaded. But I wouldn't wait. I had him arrested and put him in prison until the debt that he owed me would be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw what I had done, they were very upset, and they went to God and told Him everything that had happened, and God called me in. He said, I forgave you. You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? God was angry, and He sent me to prison to be tortured until I'd paid my entire debt. That's what my Heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. Please be patient with me. There's a pleading there, isn't there? Man, when I compare my own life and I realize, and I was brought up in church. I know that may not be your story, and the truth of the matter is, the more that I follow Jesus, the more that I walk with Him. It's not like I become less aware of my need for Him, but I become more aware of how much I need Him. And so to be able to understand and to recognize how much I need the mercy of God, and then to walk away from His presence and encounter somebody else that I'm unwilling to forgive. It's like I've lost sight of the mercy that I've received. And again, I go back to this statement. He couldn't pay his master along with his wife and children. The man fell down and begged, "Please be patient with me." And then to encounter the other servant, and that was his prayer too. Just be patient with me. Don't write me off yet. Don't sign. Don't disregard. Don't boot me out of your life yet. Just be patient with me. Don't punish me yet. Be patient with me. But there's something powerful that forgiveness, that it's an element of patience. Matter of fact, in your notes I put this: forgiveness is a product of patience. It's a product of patience to be willing to be merciful. That if I see myself as the character in this story that had a debt that I could never pay, I would never have the resources to pay the debt that I owe God, ever. And so God in His mercy forgave me the debt. Then to go out and to have the resources to overlook the offense of what's been done to me, and yet be unwilling to turn loose of it. That's almost like I grabbed hold again of the debt that I'd been freed of. There's something incredibly powerful about unforgiveness. It holds us captive. It torments us. It forces us to relive over and over and over again that offense or that wound that was done to us. I love this story because it didn't say the man didn't owe the debt. It didn't say that the fellow servant was falsely accused, that he'd been ascribed incorrectly, but he owed everything that the other man said that he owed. That wasn't the issue. The issue is that the other man's debt had been forgiven. My debt had been forgiven. And the king or God's expectation of me was to forgive the debt. And part of it requires this patience that's willing to continue to let you grow. Forgiveness is not trust. It's not saying that I'm going to give you access to everything that you've ever had access to before. But forgiveness means that I'm not going to punish you for what you've done to me. That there's not going to be this constant repayment of what you've done. I'm not going to constantly mistreat you because you were so bad to me. I'm not going to constantly slander your name because of what you've done to me. Forgiveness is, please be patient with me. I wonder, we have those people in our lives that sometime if they could push away the pride and even all the hardness, if there would be that element in their heart, that would be their prayer of just, where they would plead, just be patient with me a little while longer. If we saw that, what would our response be? And just like unforgiveness is incredibly powerful, so is forgiveness. But it's interesting, the man's unforgiveness didn't call his fellow servant to be captured. It caused him to be captured. Just like his forgiveness wouldn't necessarily free his fellow servant from his mistakes and his flaw, it would free him personally. And patience says, I don't believe God is through with you, so I'm not going to be through with you either. But there's this debt that you're free of. I turn it loose now. I'm not going to try to recapture it. I'm not going to try to gain hold of it. You know, it's amazing. I mean, with the relationships that matter in our life and in our world, they're the ones that have the capability of creating the greatest wound, to accumulating the greatest debt to us emotionally. And yet they're the ones that would probably plead for patience the strongest from us. I know my own life, man, in dealing with God at times, as I've walked with Him for a long time now, and even in some relationships, I've been that guy. That's been my prayer, where I pleaded, be patient with me. Please be patient with me. I'll get it right. Please be patient with me. I'll pay it back at all. That's really what that means, right? I'll make it right. I'll get it right. And forgiveness says, you don't owe me anything. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to try to get even with you. I'm not going to try to hold on to the debt. You're free, just like I am. The statement about forgiveness in the light of the cross. When we forgive somebody in the light of the cross, it's one undeserving soul giving something to another. Forgiveness is a product of patience. I want you to do this. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes for just a minute.